Okay, good afternoon, everybody who has decided to join us on YouTube Live this afternoon. We're here today for an event called The Future of Live Music, which basically is the subject that we're going to be investigating. The afternoon will start off with a roundtable discussion with some wonderful experts from the music industry, who I'll introduce momentarily.
Yeah.
And good afternoon, everybody who has decided to join us on YouTube Live this afternoon. We're here today for an event called The Future.
You said that without moving your lips.
Yeah, I did. That was quite good. So the first thing I was actually going to talk about was how brave we are doing this thing with the technology that's available to us. And there was the first glitch, which was completely my fault. So apologies for that. But moving on to the running order, so we've got 55 minutes with the good people you see in front of you now, and we will be discussing largely the impact of COVID-19 on the live music industry and some of the responses and sort of unpicking that landscape. And then at 3 o'clock British time, we'll be exploring our new book, which is called The Future of Live Music, coincidentally, and it's available on Bloomsbury Publishing. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our wonderful panelists today. We're joined by Peter Hook, who is a seminal British musician who needs no introduction, really, actually, because he's one of those guys who's very familiar. Can I just say, Peter, congratulations on the Gorillaz track, which stormed the charts in America. Which was
I'd like to say it was all my own work, but I had a young boy helping me called Daman. I don't know if you've heard of him.
Yeah,
I have to give most of the applause to him, but yeah, it was wonderful.
it was a triumph anyway, you know. And
came very easily, actually, which is sometimes they're very difficult and sometimes they're very easy. And that one, luckily, was very easy, so it was great. Yeah, it was nice.
So we're also joined by Teresa Moore, who's director at a Greener Festival. So we're looking forward to hearing more, Teresa, about how things are going in the world of live music for you. We have music venue and festival magnate, Mr. Aaron Mellor, as well, who is involved in all kinds of things. Or so, you know, well, we're looking to finding out what's been happening with Aaron anyway, because I imagine a lot of his activities have been spoiled by COVID or postponed. We've got Graham Massey, again, who needs no introduction, co-founder of 808 State. And we have also Liam Ogburn, who is a member of the band Working Men's Club, amongst and other bands. And Liam is actually former alumni of UCLan as well. There's quite a UCLan connection amongst the panel. My name's Tony Rigg, and I will be hosting this first event. So I'd like to kick off, if I may, by again mentioning the technology. This is the first time we've tried this thing, to do something quite like this. So please bear with us if there's any technical glitches. But the main thing is that I think we're able to bring people together, and we're able to explore these issues of what is happening in the world of live music, and we're able to share that with you all as well. So the first thing I'd like to start talking about is I'd like to ask the panel. Perhaps we can start with Teresa. What has happened with regard to COVID and well, actually, could you tell us a bit about a Greener Festival first?
Sure. We were founded in 2006, and our aim is really to help festivals and events reduce their environmental impact. And we've assessed nearly 600 different events around the world. And we share good practice where we see it. So that's our main activity. And we've always worked closely with music festivals, but we now work with music venues, indoor live venues, and beyond. Actually, we now work with sports as well, and other different types of events.
Have you met Aaron before, by the way? Because Aaron is, well, I think he was a co-founder of the Nighttime Industries Association, and with your work migrating into venues.
Yeah,
conversation.
Possibly. Not in person. I think we might have done something. I also did a bit of research into grassroots music venues in Bristol, which was published in 2016, because I don't know whether you've seen that, but obviously small music venues are under real threat, and even more so, I guess, at the moment. So that was really my personal insight into music venues, the small ones. But just going back to this, on the environmental front, obviously we go on site to music festivals and into music venues, and we carry out assessments based on what the event has told us they're doing on the environmental front. And then we produce a report based on what they've said, what we've seen, and also if there's any good practice that we can share with them. Obviously, no events, so no work for us either. I think it's worth probably, we're going to talk about post COVID, the impact of COVID and post, but I just want to sort of raise from our perspective what was happening just before COVID in terms of sustainability, because it was certainly gathering force right across the music industry, with obviously bands like Coldplay, Massive Attack thinking about not touring until they could resolve some of the environmental impact issues, and festivals as well, really examining what they're doing. Some of the data from that is that in 2018, festivals alone used 7 million tonnes of fuel, mostly fossil fuel, created 28,500 tonnes of waste, some of which were 250,000 tents disposed of, 12 tonnes of edible food from 3 festivals we collected in 2018. So pre-COVID-19, I think 2018, 2019 figures is a good place for us to start as a sort of benchmark to see there was a lot of activity going on, but events, festivals, music touring was all generating a huge amount of CO2, actually. And so I think the industry was at this pivotal point, just stepping back and trying to reassess how it was going to go forward. And of course, now we've had quite a bit of time to think in more detail about how that will happen.
Yeah, I mean, there's no regulatory constraints, are there, on festival activity? So it's really an opt-in. It's about having a social conscience, isn't it? Really, which sort of drives this kind of activity.
I think yes, there's certainly and festivals, musicians, by and large, do have a big social conscience and are very aware and stuff. Also, of course, there's an economic side to all of this, in that people have to try and make a living. Events and festivals have to be economically viable. And I think the starkest thing that we've seen is that whilst the live music industry has sort of generated huge growth over the last decade or so, so too has the environmental impact of that growth. As soon as it stopped, of course, the environmental impact has stopped. Nobody wants to see all these events finish for good. But one of the questions we're asking ourselves is, how do we get a balance between the economic side of making music festivals, music gigs viable, touring viable, whilst actually keeping balance with the environment. And that's the question that we've been focusing on really over the last couple of months. How can that work?
Well, it's great work, without a doubt. And, I wonder if the economic effects of COVID on the festivals will pinch them, and whether or not the agenda may get pushed back a little bit. But, do you have any thoughts on that, Teresa?
Well, all the signs are, I think, that there is still a big interest in climate change and the environmental impact of what we're doing. I don't see any of that falling away. In fact, the discussion seems to have almost ramped up because we've had time to sort of reflect on it a bit more. I do think, it's hard to say, and it'd be interesting to see what everybody else thinks about how music events will shape up in the next year. But I think they will change. And I think that some of that will be, as a byproduct, beneficial to the environment. But I also think that, that initially there will be a real push to just stay afloat to get the economics back in line. But it's difficult to say, for us, it's trying to achieve an environmental and economic balance, and that one shouldn't sort of grow at the expense of the other, really.
Sure, that should be complementary, really. Yeah.
They should be complementary, yes.
Great. Okay. Well, thanks, Teresa. That's great. Well, obviously, we're looking forward to hearing more from you as the conversation unfolds. I would like to try and make it a bit conversational, but I think, it's beneficial really to assess to what degree the panelists have been affected. So, clearly you've explained your perspective. Peter, Graham and Liam are musicians, two with mature careers, one who is, was literally ramping up to, really gaining momentum and at a tipping point. But Peter, can I ask you, what were your plans that you were unable to do? How many gigs did you have to cancel? What's the sort of, what impact has that had on you? Who else has it affected? For example, your sound guy, your sound team, the musicians you work with.
There's about 12 of us, including management. We're pretty light as a group. One of the things I learned, from my other incarnations was to try and be as light as possible, which I suppose reflects on a conservation thing. I've lost, God, it must be about 150 gigs, I would have thought.
Wow, that's serious. But that the 12 people, do you, with regards to your management, for example, what's the economics of those, the arrangements? Is the money?
Well, no, the economics for them are that they can claim. Because I'm a limited company and I pay myself on dividends, I can't. So, it's one of those things, isn't it? So the boys are claiming they're 80% of their wages, up to 2.5. So that's good for them.
Great, yeah.
My management obviously, presumably, can't do that either. So it's we're the ones that are looking at the time off, if you like, without being any financial assistance. I mean, it's a difficult one. I mean, I'm lucky in that I have royalties from 40 years that still pay out. And I think from that point of view, they're actually hoping that all these people staying at home have actually been listening to music more. So there may actually be, on those terrible pittances we get paid from Spotify and Amazon, Apple Music and all that lot may have increased. But yeah, I mean, to lose live is terrible. I mean, it's weird though, because it's like, it's not actually the financial part of it for me that's been the the worst part. The oddest thing is that through my career, there have been times when I said, right, that's it, I'm not playing anymore. I've had enough. And then you miss it and you come back. When someone comes along and takes it off you like this, you're like going, what? You know, I mean, the fact that I've not been on an airplane for 7 or 8 months is just the weirdest thing in the world for me. You know, that's a personal level. The group
kind of travels in your blood, is it then, Peter?
Well, yeah, not by choice probably, but I'm so used to it in the same way that probably Graham is. Maybe you will be once you get going. For me to not travel is weird, and I must admit I've quite enjoyed it because it wasn't an enjoyable pastime, especially as you get older most of the time. But the thing is that, yeah, watching the gigs go and watching my younger group suffer financially has been hard. So, but I don't think any of us expected it to go on for as long as this. And, you know, now that I'm looking into the future, you know, the next gig that we've got, I mean, oddly enough, we're still being told that our September tour in France is going to go ahead. The French are showing no signs of cancelling, and they're saying that you know, the French tour late September will go ahead. The thing is, it's all very well with the gigs going ahead, because if they pay as we go, yeah, we don't know what arrangements they've made with the venues, whether there'll be 10 people or whether there'll be 100 or 1,000. We've no idea what their terms by their government will be at how these things work, but we are still being told that we are going. And then you come to the point of, how do you get the band there? You know, if you've got a couple of members of the band that don't want to sit in a van with, you know, 8 other people, you know, they don't want to take the risk. I mean, we've not canvassed that point because we haven't actually got the go ahead, but it has been mooted that, you know, some certain members of the group don't want to put their parents in jeopardy. You know, you get that whole, like a vicious circle, isn't it, of actually trying to do something. So we're all moaning about losing all the gigs, then we get offered the gigs, and then we realize that not only can't we do them, you know, you've got the promoters that can't actually make them pay. So when it gets nearer the time, you might find that you're not doing a full tour with 12 dates as we've got. You might find that only 3 of the promoters can possibly make it pay. The good thing about France is that a lot of the smaller gigs that we play, which are 500 to 1,000, maybe 1,500 tops, are all government owned and government financed. And they tend to operate whatever, whether there's 10 people in or 1,500, they operate because they're funded by the government. So that's one good thing about going to a place like France. But yeah, I mean, it's still so, I was sort of hoping that someone could tell me the future of live music, because I haven't got a clue. And it's also, there's so many other different things. It's like we're just organising a gig for the Hacienda, which will be a pay-per-view gig for our first time of doing it. And I thought, well, that's great, and it's coming together quite well. And I said, well, let's do one for Peter Hook and the Light, you know, dead obvious, really. So we started investigating that. And then because we've got gigs booked in January, the promoters didn't want us saying, well, I'd rather you didn't do anything on the internet, because the internet will stop ticket sales for your gig in London. And then other people, where we've got a tour, we had a tour of Greece. The Greek promoter said, well, I don't want you doing that because it'll affect your ticket sales in Greece because the internet's worldwide. And you're like, oh my God. So you're actually opening up a different kind of worms, if you like, about what you will be allowed to do, because the internet goes everywhere and everybody around the world can listen to it. So the promoters, who are obviously nervous in another way, are thinking, well, maybe you shouldn't do anything on the internet. And then you go,
Yeah, but I mean, with the internet, you clearly, there's a couple of thoughts there. One of them is different countries, different attitudes, different governments, people having different attitudes to, how they're responding to COVID. Where I think in the UK, there's it's been mooted that we've been hit quite hard. You know, the results, you know, the impact it's had has been worse here than other places, and that's going to affect you know, how we respond. So
I mean, it seems to me that everybody's desperate to get back to normal, but
you know, I mean, I think this economic
what the new normal will be it's absolutely open and debatable. I mean, when you're watching, there's so many contradictory opinions on the disease itself. Nobody can adequately protect anybody because they still don't understand it, and you know, they haven't got a handle on it at all. So it's just odd. And I was talking to Clint Boone about it yesterday, actually, and both Clint is in the same position as me, where he's basically lost a career, but he's had to find other ways of he's doing Zoom gigs for people, which I thought, oh, that's a great idea. It's the same sort of thing we wanted to do. And you know, you musicians are creative, so you will have to get creative about how you get across to your public, to your audience, and how you win them over. I mean, it's just it's like the old days, really, when you couldn't get a gig. You know, when Joy Division started, we couldn't get a gig to save our lives. So we had to be very inventive in the way that we harangued people, and also inventive in the way that you came up with ideas that you could try and build any way forward. So, I mean, you're in the same sort of position. And the internet, as we know as musicians, has been the greatest thing that ever happened and the worst thing that ever happened, because you watched your record sales disappear, was such a huge part of your career, and now you've watched your gigs disappear. It does make you wonder what's going to happen next. And that's what me and Clint were saying. My God, would we ever thought? And becoming a victim of your own success is another problem. You know, like for the Rolling Stones, who could play to 75,000, 100,000 people, their possibility of playing normally is much worse than mine, where you could play to 100 people or 200 people. And, you know, my mate said to me today, he said, well, why don't you do, you know, like highest paid? We'll go on the internet, play one gig, and we'll have 10 people and they've got to pay 10,000 each. And I was going, well, that's not going to work, is it? Because it's distasteful. It's also, you know, getting an insult to most of your audience. It's like, oh God, that's not good. So I mean, what the hell do you start to do? And a lot of the online gigs are actually coming together quite well. We find doing this Hacienda one from scratch, which is quite advanced now, has actually been quite easy to do, because the virtual turnstile, you know, the protecting of it until it actually goes live, when you can't protect it from a ticket point of view, everything's quite well covered. So it's quite, and you know, it looks like it's going to be a thing to do. But as I said to you, as soon as our promoters, as a touring band around the world, heard,
in a kickback,
they were like going, you can't do that. You're going to, you know, I'm not going to do the tour then if you're going to do that.
I mean, you can understand that, can't you? Because promoters have also been, you know, hit as hard as.
Well, yeah, I mean, promoting, without a shadow of a doubt, is the worst job in the world, because it's always you that stands to lose and gain everything. The band usually get paid whether you have a fail of a gig or a great gig. You know, I mean, promoting without a doubt, and I would never argue with a promoter from that point of view. They definitely take the most risks and the most chances. And you need people like that. We couldn't function without them, because usually bands tend to be quite safe and won't take chances. So,
I mean, you have been, whilst the live element's gone, you have been incredibly busy.
Yeah.
I think, you know, there was a Hacienda live stream.
Two, yeah.
Something like, there's been two, hasn't there? One, I know, got about 1.6 million views. You couldn't really do that in a live, you know, the geographical constraints are removed, you know, in those circumstances.
Yeah, I mean, and also I think that because they were all for charity, which was generally much easier. Yeah. Everybody, you know, welcomes it, if you like. Whereas as soon as you just go strictly commercial and you're asking a $5, people go, oh, a $5. Oh, I can't say I'm going for that. You know. So I mean, it changes the complexion. But the great thing about doing the Hacienda gigs on, you know, United We Stream was that everybody was pulling together. There was a wonderful feeling of everybody being interested in, you know, what we were going through, which was lovely. But yeah, trying to survive from a financial point of view is completely different. And again, you know, the only festival we've got that hasn't been cancelled as yet is November, when the promoter was told that, oh, you should be all right for that festival in November, which is 10,000 people. So we're like, oh, well, you know, and then you sit back and you can't imagine that happening.
Yeah.
Because
I'd like to ask Aaron about that.
You look at.
He's, you know, Aaron, you know, we've seen a lot of things pushed back, perhaps optimistically, to September, October, November. You know, it was kind of, you know, when people were told they couldn't do events, that was, you know, when is the soonest we think we might be able to get things back on track? Aaron, how has this affected you? What are your, you know, you had 30 plus venues, which have been
45 venues in the UK and 7 international, and currently they are all closed. Some will be closed now, and you know, the earliest possible start date will be September. There is talk from the government in the UK that we may open on the 22nd or the 26th or the 4th of July, but this is really for pubs with social distancing and outdoor areas. You know, the majority of our venues are creative arts and music venues, and this relies heavily on close social interaction. Nobody wants to be in a nightclub or a music gig with 20% occupancy because the atmosphere just isn't there. You know, it's this close social interaction that really matters.
Like the Hacienda, mate, wasn't it? When it opened.
When it opened, before it was successful.
Yeah, successful.
But it was a lot more enjoyable when it was successful, though, is the point.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Mm.
So in order to create that atmosphere, you need people in close proximity. And I just don't know how we can social distance a nightclub or a live music event. You certainly can't do that at a festival with any kind of commercial wherewithal. So you've got the social distancing mechanic against the commerciality of employing more security, more staff, PPE training, and it's not viable.
Do you think, though, that you're going to be able to pull it off? Because I would have thought that if you do let half capacity into your club and you're telling people to stay away from each other, and then they have a few drinks, it's going to be.
We're going to have to.
Human nature is going to make it impossible. And your security are going to have. It's just a recipe for disaster, isn't it?
It will still be very difficult to manage. I mean, we've seen. You know, I don't know if you saw this. There's Travis McCready did a gig in America. I think it was sort of billed as the first lockdown, you know, sort of post-COVID gig, where, you know, and you can just imagine how this is different from the experiences we're used to in the live environment, where there was 20% capacity. I think it was something like, 239 people attended an 1,100 capacity venue. Everyone had their temperatures tested on the way in. They were all wearing masks. They were all seated in family in pods with the groups that they were in if they travelled with, you know, if they were visiting with people that they lived in. The place was sprayed before the gig. You know, it's a very different landscape. But
I think you could do that on a novelty basis, but I think to try and replicate that 3 or 4 nights a week is just not going to be.
Unless you put the prices up
at the moment, and I'm up for doing something different. I just don't think that's the kind of gig experience that people want to go. Where you're kind of, you know,
but in a vacuum,
6 or 8 people.
In a vacuum, a complete vacuum, do you think people will pay? You know, I mean, Peter mentioned the extra, somebody suggesting paying £10,000. You know, that kind of thing. Will the appetite affect the supply and demand and the pricing? You know,
like I say, I really think on a novelty basis, on a one-off basis, maybe you could charge people more money for that close experience on smaller gigs. Some friends are doing a festival in Newcastle where they're effectively putting 250. They call them VIP platforms, but they're basically disabled platforms that will be spaced out within 2 meters each, and doing gigs with bands like the 1975, which will be a very low capacity. So it'll effectively be a 2,000 capacity festival on 100 or so platforms that have got 4 or 5 people on each platform. You know, so for a novelty, yes, but as a consistent model that's sustainable for the future of music as we know it? Certainly not.
Was it a charity gig, or 1975 getting paid normally? I mean, the 1975.
So bands, I mean, it's a fraction of the normal fee. I mean, 1975 are a good example. They were offered a very, very sizable fee to do the same festival, and now it's scaled back. That's an absolute fraction of what their normal fee would be.
So is there a combination of monetizing, because obviously music business is desperate to get wheels turning again. And actually, we've just heard Peter, based on, the turnout, ticket sales on 150 gigs, we're talking, what, millions, Aaron?
I wish it was millions. Probably less than you think. The interesting thing from, right, darling, from a gig point of view is it'll make, when people see how much a band probably get from a gig, I think that they'll probably be terribly shocked as to how much other costs are involved in a concert.
Sure.
So on the internet, the fiver you're paying, the costs are much less.
Yeah. I was thinking growth.
It gets more. So
so the money. Sorry, Peter. Sorry.
That's okay.
So the money, basically in gross terms, that's been sucked out of the industry, the money vacuum is massive.
Yes,
but obviously
even for 150 gigs of mine, it's a lot of money.
Yeah.
That you're looking at.
Supply chain all feeds into those gigs as well. So it's the guy who's renting the mojo barrier, the guy who's fixing the microphones, the guy with the security of the venue. This has ripples through the entire supply chain. We forget sometimes that music to the UK is a massive global export, and when we're not doing
social aspect, isn't it? I mean, what we've been robbed of is that massive interaction with people, strangers mostly, that we've all taken for granted for years and years and years and years. It's what makes festivals so special, is to get all people with one thing on the mind. We're all, here to have a great time, listen to some great music. It's a real vibe that human beings need. And what's happening is that, as you rightly say, the novelty value for the 1975 as well, of looking at a few people on a podium,
it's not delivering that, is it?
Yeah.
Graham, can I ask you, I mean, how has it affected you? You've had touring activity.
Yeah, we were just about to set off on tour. And the thing that it affects most is momentum to me. The momentum of getting to that point of just about touring required, putting a record out, which took 2 years and stuff. And, you're constantly focusing on this point on the horizon all the time with music. And what this is mostly the feeling I get from it is just like you will almost have to start again. That momentum is now lost. And plus that huge amount of teamwork that everyone's been talking about with the people. You're one small piece of the machinery, that everyone else has organized their life to that point as well and have to reorganize everything, so similar to Peter in a way that it's all up in the air as to the information coming back in as to when that might pick up, because we've got gigs moved, postponed is the word, isn't it?
Not cancelled, moved.
Yeah. And that is a that's largely the promoter's game, but
because they don't want to lose the obviously.
Well, we'd absolutely love it if we could do it, but you're responsible for quite a set of special people that you don't want to put in harm's way as well. So there's a responsibility as a company, not to risk. And we're quite elderly now, the whole team. We've had the same team for years and years and years. It's like
and some of the audience maybe, Graham.
Well, yeah, there's the squad, yeah. Plus, I do spray quite a lot of stuff out of my saxophone while I'm going.
I mean, it was quite interesting. I was talking today about Castlefield for us, for the Hacienda that got moved to, I don't know where it's been moved to, actually. Next July, I think. And obviously the promoters don't want to give the money back, a lot like the airlines. And I was asking the manager how many had asked for their money back from Castlefield, which is 8,000 people, and there was only 300 refunds. Yeah,
we've had some good feedback from our fans as to like an
people are sticking with us, aren't they?
Yeah.
What's driving that? Do you think? Is it?
Well, it's loyalty. It's like Graham said. These are people that you've looked after and nurtured, and hopefully, delivered the goods to for years.
I think people understand it, and I think people, do invest in loyalty in bands. That's an important thing to carry us through this period. Can we survive a year, 2 years, 3 years before coming back?
But I mean, in effect, these things work in cycles, don't they? So, I mean, Graham, you sort of alluded to maybe a 2-year cycle on this, or was it that the preparation of the material? You spent 2 years making an album.
Yeah, it's the actual coming up there. My head is either sort of making studio things or doing live gigs. They're never in those two places at the same time, particularly.
But the actual, it is in effect, in real terms, a loss of a year, a large part of a year's revenue.
Well, that's what I'm saying. It's not a loss of a year, it's a loss of maybe a 5-year period,
Yeah. So even worse than.
And now my natural instinct is to go back into a studio head, to create something that you can control,
Start again.
You want to be able to control something, and you can control music making.
Peter, how often do you go back to the same gigs? So I'm just trying to assess, would you go back to and do the same shows a year later, or is it a 2 years?
I mean, because I've been touring the LPs, we were doing it every year. So, I mean, we've been very lucky, actually. We've been very, since we began in 2010, we now have a route that takes us Mexico, Brazil, Argentina, America, Canada, France, Australia, New Zealand. We've really built that up, as Graham said, and we tended to do that more or less every year. If we get a successful album like Substance, which was a huge album for New Order, then you can get 2 years out of that because people want that.
Yeah.
So I mean,
off the year, basically a year's revenue.
Yeah, I've never. This is the first time that I've not toured and played for a long time, since just before New Order split, when we were doing nothing.
But people are staying safe, and that's the.
Yeah. I mean, it's. I mean, hopefully, I mean, I love what I do, and I like to think a lot of people love what we all do. So the thing is that it will still be there. Yeah. Again, it's as Teresa was saying about the festivals. It's like, will they be there, or will the venues be there? Because they are, as Aaron says, are cemented. They're not flexible. They can't do anything else. They can only sit there and put gigs on.
Yeah.
Or put theatre on, or a poetry reading, or whatever. But whatever it is, it still it still needs an audience. So he's deprived of that audience for as long as it takes to sort this out. And those buildings may not be there. They're owned by other people generally who want the rent or get out. So I think that the big problem here that we have to face is that Graham and I will probably still be here next year, hopefully, mate, and we will be able to carry on what we're doing. It's just that the shock will be, are there places, are there festivals? I mean, and I'm sure that people will, take up the mantle if a festival in Bristol has gone bankrupt because of the Gap. Somebody else will start, because that's what always happens. But the thing is that, as Aaron quite rightly said, there's a lot of people, apart from me and Graham, we employ people. It goes right down the line, all the guys who put the lights up, everything, they're just warehouses full of PA, full of lights. People's lives are being decimated, particularly in our industry, because of COVID-19. And I have no confidence in what I've seen so far that any country is close to sorting it out, because nobody knows what the hell is going to happen. And I think that, unfortunately for me, I do think that these social distancing gigs on the podiums and stuff will become the norm for a while, and you will unfortunately get again, it becomes a hierarchical, isn't it? It's the people with money that can afford to go, and people who don't have money won't be able to afford to go to them. So it's
there'll be a response to that, won't there? Sorry, Graham.
Yeah, there will be a response to that, and there is already a response in some ways of, you know, illegal raves, and you know, there's been a lot in social media recently about you know, things cropping up in London in terms of raves, and certainly in the, you know, you hear things about the youth will just naturally want to gather, and I don't know how you gonna police that at this point as well. You know, it's kind of worrying in some ways if you've got, you know.
Well,
I mean, it's weird for me to say because we came from that thing in the first place. You know what I mean?
The interesting thing is that those raves are illegal anyway.
Yeah.
Now, they're
funny that
based on many other things. You know, some kid going along bringing it home to his grandma. Your mum and dad aren't going to be very pleased, are they? You go.
No, absolutely not.
You know, it becomes like a replay of punk and acid house. It does become that way, yeah. It's terrible.
But that thing of testing temperature on the way in is not safe either. You know, that is like, you know, most infectious people don't have any temperature or symptoms, you know, so a lot of these
trying to show give people a sense that something's being done about it. Often these things, the notion of
it's just like the metal detector on the door of the hacienda.
Exactly.
There you go. This is
treat.
Metaphysical metal detector at the hacienda. It still didn't guarantee you anything. So yeah, I mean, this is going to be a really bad time for our industry, but along with a lot of other industries. I mean, even driving, you know, round this morning and hearing how many, you know, Centrica losing 5,000 people, and you know, there's so much. This is what the papers were worried about, was that the economy was driving the response to COVID-19, as opposed to the science of it. And you can understand that, because watching our economy disintegrate the way it has is, I mean, it's a capitalist society that is being brought to its knees, isn't it? You know.
I was going to say, Peter, you know, when Graham was talking about the youth wanting to congregate, it was reported on the Easter weekend. I think this was the same weekend that, you know, you did a big hacienda streaming event, but there was 1,000 parties in Manchester, in the Manchester area alone, that the police, you know, intervened in, you know. So I mean, there's clear evidence that, you know, people want to, but I mean, I think that, again, there was an evolving picture of how serious it was. You know, a lot of people, you know, were kind of, you know, catching on as they continue to develop. You want your
freedom back, don't you? You want your freedom. I mean, you know, surely the most thing we cherish in life is the freedom to do what we want to do. And here's something, and of course the government has to react and tell us all what to do. And I must admit, it's because of the anxiety that I felt with what I suffer from, asthma and pneumonia, then I'm quite happy about it, because I'm like, oof, you know, stay away. But yeah, looking at the long term, even the short term, you know, watching Aaron's clubs close, God, you know, it's just shocking what's happened. And I think for the most part, people have actually been responsible. You know, the Black Lives Matter thing is quite an interesting conundrum, because you've got something that's very important that needs to be sorted out. You know, we have a democratic right to try and sort that out. And then, of course, the juxtaposition of worrying about COVID and you're supposed to be social distancing puts people in a terrible predicament. You know, it's an awful
moral well-being, isn't it? Really, you know. But
yeah, it's, and as I said to you before, I was hoping that maybe you lot could tell me what the future would be, because
well, we'll work on the conundrum together. I think that's the thing. But Liam, can I get to Liam, the voice of youth as well? But your band at a tipping point, I would describe it. You gained a lot of momentum. What's COVID done to you and your band's activities? What was happening, and what have you not been able to do?
Well, it's done a lot, and to shadow what both
all right, we've got
Graham and Peter said, it's just a very our first album is coming out.
Sorry,
our first album was meant to be.
Sorry, Liam, you were glitching there. Do you want to try again? We missed that. I think.
Is that any better now? Is that better?
Yes.
Yeah. Our first album was meant to come out on the 5th of June. We've postponed that due to coronavirus till the 2nd of October. But even then, we're unsure about what kind of state the country will be in and how we'll be able to even promote, the album. It was a really important year for the band. But yeah, I mean, 40 or 50 gigs approximately cancelled or postponed again till September, October. But, we don't even know if they're going to be going ahead yet. Possibly a couple of European festivals we're unsure of. But yeah, it's affected like me greatly, as I can't receive any support from the government either, and being a musician was my main income, and now I've had to go back to working a lot more, like just in a retail shop basically. So yeah, very, very strange year so far.
What's the sort of feeling of the band? Are you resolute to pick up where you left off? Is it a stay? Or is everything? Is the band bearing up?
Yeah, I mean, I think so. I mean, we're doing everything that we can at the minute. I mean, Sid and our producer Ross Orton have a project called Minsky Rock, and they decided to make a mixtape of the album to be released on the 5th of June. So it was released about a week ago. And yeah, I mean, we're just kind of doing what we can to keep people engaged. Like, the pre-orders are still coming in quite strong, which is really good to see. There's a lot of people which are anticipating, obviously, when we're going to be coming back and playing again. With us being a relatively new band, there's a lot of excitement around our live performance, which is something that we kind of value ourselves as, being quite good at. It's a live performance, but this just hit us even harder because of that, not being able to play live.
I'd like to sort of try and go a bit conversational now, if we can. But one thought is, if we're looking at how people are responding, clearly we've talked about some of the things that all of you have been doing. I'm seeing interesting things like, for example, Live Nation exploring drive-through gigs, and I'm thinking, I was actually thinking about Teresa when I was reading that. What do you make of that as a response? Because some of these you're putting people, okay, so you're dealing with the sort of social distancing because people are in their own containers, so to speak. You can manage spacing. You can use things like unused airport car parks, which are unused, frankly, at the moment. But you're dealing with lots of traffic and things like that. Do you have any thoughts on that, Teresa?
I do. I think one of the things that we're sort of, because we're all speculating and we're seeing some of these initiatives, the slightly disappointing thing is that where we're, by government, being advised as far as possible not to use public transport, and we have spent a decade or more trying to encourage festival audiences, event audiences to travel to gigs by public transport. In a way, you see all of that unravel, and now the push is on that people will go back to their cars because of social distancing. Fair enough, but it seems that all of that work to and it was paying off to some extent, you know, that people were more and more using public transport or other ways of getting to gigs. You know, you can just see all of that unraveling. We've had a big push on single-use plastics over the last couple of years for obvious reasons, you know, the ocean pollution, but plastic pollution everywhere. And suddenly you've got the whole issue of PPE, and that anybody, if, you know, live events come back, serving at bars, security staff, anybody sort of dealing with the public directly, and this is not, you know, before you get to the artists and the performance, will probably be required to use some sort of PPE, masks, gloves at the minimum, perhaps aprons, all made of single-use plastic. So again, you know, you're thinking, well, how can we get around this? Otherwise we're back to, and actually I'm seeing it on the roads now, you know, just around the corner. I've seen, you know, those blue single-use plastic gloves just thrown on the side of the road. They're beginning to pop up everywhere. And in terms of a gig or an event trying to reduce its waste, and its single-use plastic waste in particular, you know, we just have images of that issue really popping up again because it has to.
You've got that problem, haven't you? That once I mean, the bigger problem is, as we talked about before, is getting back to normal.
Yeah.
When you get back to normal, then we can start again. It's like, this is like the biggest pause for all of us, and we've all had to pause for a year, and then we have to start again. You know, this has been the thing, and I must admit that I agree with you. On lockdown, standing outside has been an absolute delight because of the lack of noise, the lack of traffic. Listening to the natural things in the world has been absolutely wonderful. And my God, didn't we need to take that moment to just listen just for a second? I mean, you know, the hope is that you'll learn and not take it for granted so much maybe as we have done. But yeah, I mean, everything is going to have to slowly get back to normal, which is what the government is pushing us to. Whether it's pushing us too fast, we'll find out the hard way. But yeah, it's a great shame. You've done fantastic work, and it's all gone. You're like, you know, back to, it's like snakes and ladders, isn't it? It's like being in a group is a bit like snakes and ladders anyway, because you're always going up one or coming down the other. So it's, you know, in a funny way, I'm sort of used to it. I mean, if I were you, Liam, I'd put the album out, because at least you'd get the pleasure, as Graham was saying, and the satisfaction of knowing that all that work you put into your record, which will be appreciated. I would imagine it's probably a management PR guy going, oh no, don't do it now. Do it just before we go on tour or whatever. But as Graham said, you know, if you're a decent musician and if you're half as good as a musician, just go and do another one. We've got plenty of time.
Yeah, that's very true.
The thing is that it's very difficult. Don't lose everything. Got a record ready to go. I don't think most people are going to be gigging, if I'm realistic, before January, February next year. And January, February are always the worst months for our industry anyway. So it's, you know, you could be looking at another 8 months. I mean, I was looking at a gig today for the Hacienda that was in Easter next year. And we got a letter going, oh, well, someone else is coming for this gig, so you've got to take it now. And I'm going, how can you say that when nobody knows what's going to happen tomorrow? And we're talking about 9 months down the line, getting the pressure off a promoter to book that gig. You're like, that's crazy, you know?
Yeah, you know, just we're running out of time now, unfortunately. But you know, this has been, you know, quite an excellent and remarkable conversation. Can I just ask, do we have?
I'm on Zoom, mate.
Have we seen any interesting innovations emerging in this situation? Things that you think are great ideas that, you know, could take off?
Oh,
I know you've been doing, you've all been doing things anyway, haven't you?
Yeah, and I mean, it's been difficult. The Hacienda, the 2 shows were difficult. Just working with the lads, we only did 7 songs. Hello. Sorry about that. It's very difficult dancing around everyone, trying to keep everybody safe and yourself safe. Has been difficult. But again, as I said to you there, when we did it and I saw it, I thought, oh, fantastic, that worked really well. It was really enjoyable, and it kept me going, and it gave me a lot of heart, and it made me realize, as Graham said, that we will still be there for us. The people that you worry about and are the ones that are running, like Aaron, running these venues, that may not still be there. We've got a long career, and hopefully you will have a long career as well to use. So it's just pause for us.
Yeah.
The real damage is being done elsewhere, I feel.
We've been getting comments coming through whilst we've been talking, and so Boogie Dave says physical distancing can't even be policed in supermarkets, let alone venues, which is
mixed with alcohol.
Yeah,
it's going to be terrible. And then Aaron, as the owner of the club, is going to be put up with the problem of a load of kids, kicking off because they're a bit merry, like we normally have problems with it anyway. It's going to be very difficult to do. Nobody likes being told what to do.
It requires managing at the best of times, doesn't it? A lot more fan engagement since COVID. COVID is another comment. Loving weekly convos between Hooky and Jack, for example.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about this music world that I'm in, I've always felt that you get out what you put in. And it's always been delightful to me to work, because some people have to work for a living. I've been very lucky doing this game. I've had a great time doing it, and I heartily recommend it to anybody who can pull it off. But it is hard work, and you do have to keep up. And usually, the fans are the ones that we need, and we are hoping to give them the best that we can for as long as we can. And we're all just shambling along together, aren't we? Us and the fans.
I'm really sorry, we've run out of time. So what I propose to do, I can almost feel Professor Mazierska with the crook about to pull me up before we go on to the next event. But can I just very quickly ask anyone for their final thoughts that we have?
I'd just like to be optimistic, actually, about the future. I think that the new norm won't be the same as the old norm, and some things we will have to give up. I'm very interested in the notion of the hybrid event. We've already seen a bit like the Hacienda live streaming, but the combination of some live attendance with streaming, I think that will just develop. I mean, Royal Opera House have been doing it for quite a long time. I was at an event at the Albert Hall that was a Spandau Ballet event, and they streamed that, as well as had a combo of a gig, a conference, and a panel discussion. So I just think there will be events.
People should be a little bit more inventive as well.
Same as it's been. It's going to change on the sustainability front. If live music can reach more people through perhaps streaming, but reduce the carbon footprint, that can only be a good thing.
Well, we only have one planet, don't we? We've got to look after it. But, again, the art forms, the delivery, all of these things you can see are in a constant state of evolution and development as well, So would anyone else like to, I feel really privileged.
I would just like to say that, I think the income from streaming could be addressed at this point. I think, people like Spotify really do need to address that for the health of music throughout the world, really, And music is about health.
So ignored, so unfair.
Yeah. It's like we need it now. We don't need it in 2 years. It's kind of, there's no income.
the next 6 months are going to be hard because this machine just doesn't switch back on again like a light switch.
Yeah.
You know, you've got to program these things in. If we are allowed to open on the 4th of July, which bands are going to be wanting to play in those? That, you know, I don't see that live music venues will be allowed to open any time before September. If we're lucky, at the best case scenario.
Yeah, particularly for up and coming bands, and I would encourage people to go over to Bandcamp and start finding new bands to support.
Absolutely.
You know.
There's a rehabilitation of the industry to undergo, isn't there? You know, it's, as you say, Aaron, it's not going to switch back on. Well, I think we've been, you know, really fortunate, you know, bringing everyone together today. I can't thank you enough.
Thank you.
You know, I'm hope we'll be able to do this again. You know, there are some of the people here, Peter, Aaron, myself. You know, we are involved in a master's course at UCLan. Where we, it's you know, basically a course for people who want to work or develop careers, sustainable careers in the music industry. Graham's actually also an honorary fellow. We have doctors in our presence at UCLan. Peter, I'm sure you'll carry on innovating. Graham, so will you, and making amazing music. Liam, I'm sure you'll have the career that you deserve. Aaron, I'm sure you'll carry on making money. And Teresa, I'm sure you'll making the planet a better, you know, more sustainable place. So thank you very much, everyone. And we're going to take a very short break now whilst we bring everyone together into the room and set up. Thank you. Thank you.
Able to go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5. Able to go. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 7, 6, 5, 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 7, 6, 5.
I suspect you've got some people with YouTube audio on in the background. If you could mute the YouTube audio. I suspect you've got some people with YouTube audio on in the background. If you could mute.
Hello?
Hello, Eva, I think we're live.
Are we? Yes, so hello everybody. My name is Ewa Mazierska and I'm joined here by my two colleagues, Tony Rigg and Les Gillon, as well as a large number of collaborators on the book about the future of popular music. And we come together to celebrate publication of this book, which happened today, and also to present specific chapters and also to have a bit of discussion about the future of popular music. This is the second part of this event. The first discussed the future largely from the perspective of COVID, how COVID influences artists, musicians, and other professionals. We want to have a broader look now and focus on that. But before we move to that, I want to mention two things about the book, as we believe it provides a framework for evaluating and thinking about the future of popular music. And it makes two main points. The first point is that live music is always changing. So what was live for one generation is not live for the next. So those in the past who would look at music, live music now, perhaps wouldn't recognize it as live music, but we also can assume that future generations, for future generations, or for us, the live music of future generations won't be live. So this is one idea which is elaborated by authors. The second is that although the live music industry is very buoyant, it kept growing for many years and became larger than recorded music. It was always fragile. It meant that as well as growth, it also experienced contraction, particularly those who worked in small venues. The less known musicians were always in a position of this precarity and fragility. So one question which we want to ask today is how stable or unstable is the life of musician, and also what affects it. So let's now move to the chapters, maybe starting with those most theoretical, and then we'll move to those which discuss other aspects of popular music, such as spaces, the specific situation of musicians. And we have here our contributors from Holland, Arno, Erik, Rick, Martin. Are they all? I hope so. And you together wrote 2 chapters which dealt largely with the theory of live music, and also of with prospects of live music in a larger sense. So if you can present briefly your main findings, and maybe again offer some hypothesis about the development of live music. Who will start first?
Thanks for this introduction. First of all, I would like to thank the editors of the book for organizing this great event, and also congratulate them on the publication of this very nice book project. My name is Arno van der Hoeven from Erasmus University Rotterdam, the Netherlands, and indeed I co-authored the first 2 book chapters together with my colleagues who will join me for the discussion. Both chapters follow on from research conducted in the context of the PopLife project. This is a Dutch research project focusing on the ways in which local live music ecologies can contribute to value creation in the careers of musicians, the position of music venues and festivals, and cities in general. I will say a few things about the aims of our 2 chapters and how they can help us to make sense of the COVID crisis and the future of live music. The first chapter, theorizing the production and consumption of live music, attempts to map the different theoretical perspectives that contribute to understand the context in which live music is produced and consumed. We believe that these theories are helpful to understand the future of live music because they offer models for understanding, and they explain social phenomena and structure future research. I won't go into detail about the different theories discussed in this chapter, but I do want to highlight 2 concepts that have become more central in recent work on live music. The first one is networks, and the second one, ecologies. So in a globalizing and digitalizing society, it's not surprising that many of the publications discussed in our chapter approach live music from a network perspective, because both concepts are useful to understand how connections between people, organizations, and communities in different geographical and virtual places shape live music performances. So the concepts of networks and ecologies also explain how local scenes connect to global developments, and the term ecology in particular underscores the importance of diversity, with venues and festivals in varying sizes, and also diversity in terms of events that cater to different genres, communities, and support creativity at the grassroots level. So these concepts take a holistic perspective on live music, which is a trend in both research and policy making. The ecological approach to live music, as it was developed by British researchers in the Live Music Exchange project, that perspective demonstrates that each concert is made possible by a range of actors, both inside the field of music and outside the music industries. So the live music ecology is interdependent, in other words. in the Dutch situation, and that might be the same in other countries, this concept of ecologies is often used to actually assess the impact of the pandemic on the live music sector. It is argued that the lockdown demonstrates the network nature or structure of the live music ecosystem. Because when festivals were cancelled, also touring companies, suppliers, and many other companies came to a standstill. So this actually shows the broader ecology and how many jobs are generated by the live music industries. It was also discussed in the previous panel, and how a wide range of different organizations are required to enable concerts and festivals. So perhaps there's even a risk of losing those people and their skills if it takes too long before concerts are possible again. They might move on to other jobs in other sectors. The current situation also demonstrates, once again, also a point that was just made, the precarious nature of working in this sector, particularly in the case of festivals with many people on temporary contracts. This brings me to the second chapter that me and my colleagues from the PopLife project contributed to the book. And this chapter is entitled Challenges for the Future of Live Music, a review of contemporary developments. The main conclusion to be drawn from this chapter is that the live music sector already faced many issues before the pandemic, particularly at the grassroots level. So to name a few, many venues were finding ways to deal with, for example, increased competition from festivals, restrictive licensing, declining revenues, noise issues, and gentrification. And even in the situation that performing was still possible, many musicians were already struggling to get by financially. So the ecological approach to live music that I just mentioned underscores that to address the challenges in the sector, it's important to not just focus on established organizations and the most visible institutions and venues, but also on the wider network of people that contribute to this cultural form and who are often self-employed. So to end on a positive note, it could be argued that the current crisis can also help to address some of the existing challenges. This is not to downplay the situation, but in response to the pandemic, we see that many organizations in the live music ecology see creative ways to support each other and to support musicians. Some venues are reinventing their role in the local community by sharing their space with local organizations. And the travel restrictions that we currently have might actually create new opportunities for local talent in the near future. So this is just a short summary of our chapters. Thanks.
Great, thank you. Thank you for this introduction, which actually is also a good introduction to the second part, which deals with technology as a way to overcome some of these problems facing live music. So we have several authors who looked at technology as a way as a means which redefines the concept of live music, but also helps live music to develop. So our next speaker, our next author is Stephen Kerry. Again, Stephen, could you introduce yourself and present briefly your chapter?
Yeah, again, I'd just like to echo what's been said already. Congratulations on the publication.
Thank you.
My name's Stephen Kerry. I've worked as a live front of house engineer for getting towards 20 years now in the industry, and the chapter that I wrote was not hugely relevant to the coronavirus pandemic, unfortunately, but it was to do with practicalities of on-stage sound, specifically within the popular music environment. There's been an issue in recent years with live music becoming much more of a visual sort of event, and the kind of shift towards visual importance. And what the chapter was looking at was basically how through the different changes from analog to digital, and moving into things such as use of playback systems to support pop groups, and the use of in-ear monitors, that we can move towards a goal of something that I referred to as the silent stage. The silent stage refers to removing all sound sources from a stage, to allow for maximum flexibility, for the performer, but also for the production. When I've been thinking about it, there maybe are implications for the COVID-19 pandemic, in the sense that at the moment, a lot of my colleagues are out of work, and are all looking for ways to get the system moving again, to start doing live shows. And the way that they're going to be done is a little bit unknown, but the flexibility that's brought from using systems such as a silent stage may allow for more wayward suggestions to take place, such as as Tony mentioned in the other group, the drive-through sort of events. I imagine it would be quite bizarre to have no PA, everything transmitted over FM, and then the sound of some amplifiers and drums being hit on a stage. It would make much more sense to go towards the sort of thing that I was suggesting. Yeah, so basically it looks at that, and it looks at how to solve it, what the drawbacks are, why musicians are against it. And through research, I'd conducted quite a large study of 340 audio professionals. Through that research and some work with some other companies, kind of got to the bottom of what it was that artists didn't like about not having speaker systems on stage, etc., to try and basically give a way to move past that, and the end result being some sort of silent but tactile activated stage. So yeah, that's kind of the gist of the chapter, and hopefully at some point in the near future we'll be able to continue working on that and get some musicians back on a stage again and get some people getting paid.
Steve, I probably shouldn't do this, but Steve, can I ask a question? There was that idea about emulating the sense of playing instruments as if there was sound there.
Yeah.
Is that something that in some way could be translated to home performance? And another thought was, what about, when people are performing digitally at home, they don't have the big speakers behind them and stuff like that. So in essence, they do have a silent stage. They're emulating it. I know it's different to when you're doing it in front of hundreds or thousands or tens of thousands of people. Is there not resonance between some of the technologies explored in your chapter and how possible enhancements to consuming music at home?
Yeah, absolutely. There's a development at the moment, a lot of people using something called a sub pack, which is kind of a body pack that goes on you, which it's a little excessive for most people watching YouTube videos or whatever, but it basically boils down to the idea that when somebody likes to be in front of a set of speakers, the traditional thought has been, well, it's the bass frequencies, it's our kinesthetic sort of feelings, which only go up to around 30-40 hertz. Apologies if anybody's not familiar with frequency content. It turns out that much further up into the feel on the skin, the cutaneous sensations go much higher, up to around 1 kilohertz, which is something that people don't really consider at all. So yes, there's absolutely merit in using the research to aid home viewing. And also that kind of drives the market, doesn't it? Because at the end of the day, the music industry's kind of always been something to sell other products. So it's another product that the music industry can sell.
Okay, thank you very much. And now we move to Duncan Gallagher, who wrote a chapter about networked performance. Duncan, can you introduce yourself and elaborate on your research?
Absolutely. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah.
Brilliant, wonderful. Yes, so I'm Duncan. I have been a musician for many years. My initial training was in the sort of classical area, but I've recently transitioned into being a music producer. And yeah, my chapter deals with this idea of networked performance. And it's important to distinguish that from what we're seeing so much more of at the moment, which is, performance which is live streamed or mediated via the internet. What my chapter deals with is the practice of musicians sort of jamming together in real time or near real time, as close as possible over the internet. For anyone who's ever, got into the more technical aspects of using internet technology, you'll have noticed that especially for playing music, latency is a huge issue when it comes to playing in sync. When you're jamming with your friends or playing in a band in a traditional live environment, the sort of time it takes for you to hear what your bandmates are playing is very, very, very small. It's, within, the region of like a few milliseconds. Over the internet, this can be much, much larger, sometimes in the region of 200, 300 milliseconds, which is, it makes playing live in the true sense almost impossible. So essentially, my chapter is quite technical. It goes into some specific examples of software that people are using to get around this issue. And specifically a piece of software that allows you to sort of jam in sort of rhythmically segregated sections with people over the internet. So the way that this particular software circumvents the issue of latency is by rhythmically kind of placing things so that they sync up, but you might not be hearing exactly what the other person is playing at the exact time that you hear it through your system. There's a little bit of historical context because it's a practice that's been explored in some depth for many years. It's still quite a fringe activity, and it's something that I sort of acknowledge in the chapter. But hopefully, we can understand the relevance of such practice for musicians who want to play and improvise and work with other musicians in the current situation. So yeah, that's a sort of brief overview of what my chapter talks about.
Okay. Thank you very much. And the next author is Daman Thomas, who is also a practitioner. And so Mark, please tell us more about yourself and about your work for this chapter.
Hi there, and nice to hear from everyone so far, and the panel before, that was really interesting. Yeah, so my chapter is mainly around live streaming and is it you got me, haven't you? Yeah, correct. Sorry. So essentially everything I wrote about has been kind of already rewritten or fast forwarded by this process, and we're seeing so much more live streaming and performance happening across all sectors, as we all know. So a lot of my discoveries have kind of been fast forwarded and are suddenly here with us now. Much of what I talked about was sort of discussing why people weren't doing it more, and then I went on to discuss how the documentation of the creative process, so songwriting, creating beats, and sort of them, etc., and how that was going to be on the rise. And I think we're seeing that now with everything that's going on. Yeah, and so I talk a lot about Twitch and various aspects of performing from home, basically.
Do you have a yes, if I can chip in with the question, do you do more of this type of work since COVID, or it's
well, personally,
really
it's been difficult at home lately with us all being in the house, even though I was kind of doing it previously. But I haven't been as much, actually, funnily enough, lately. I've sort of been engaging in what other people are doing and watching, but we have done 2 or 3 live streams from the house, kind of similar situations to this, where we have back-to-back artists and bands and sort of festivals and various things like that that are going online. I'm sure people have been seeing lots of change like that. So yeah, but
yeah, for the conversation after 4, when we'll be picking up on a lot of these points.
Yes.
Cool.
Yes. Okay.
Yeah, thank you.
So our actually next part of this book was about the changing status of the performing, of the live musician. We actually don't have the authors of these chapters, but maybe I briefly say what they were about. So we had the chapter about self or self, which is the first neuron-based synthesizer, if I'm right, and which obviously rose a question: who is a live musician, and what are the ethical framework of this type of work? And we also had a chapter about traveling holograms. Both of these chapters somehow argued that you don't need a real musician to get a live performance, and performance which is recognized as live by the audience. Maybe we again return. Yeah,
interestingly, where you don't need a live performer, in the COVID environment, it raises interesting questions, doesn't it? So one of the ideas of the self chapter is that it was a living musical instrument, and made noise organically. I wonder if it could be affected by COVID.
Yes, well.
But holograms, in many cases, they're often of dead artists anyway, so they're not going to
can be also the living artist who prefers to send the hologram rather than go himself or herself on stage, because again of this anxiety which the pandemic brought to us. So
that's something that will definitely be a topic for the later discussion.
So then we have 3 chapters about spaces of live performance, and one of them was authored by Robert Kronenburg. Robert, if you can tell more about yourself and your arguments, we'll be most happy.
Yeah, thanks, Eva. I'm Robert Kronenburg, and I'm at the University of Liverpool, and I come from a slightly different perspective in that I'm an architect by profession, and I've studied all kinds of mobile and transportable buildings throughout my research career. And over the past 10 years or so, I've been looking particularly at live music and venues, because I'm also a musician and love music like everyone here. So my chapter was called Sound Spaces, Pop Music, Concerts and Festivals in Urban Environments. And I was particularly interested in how live music transforms urban space, city space. And it's something which has been around for an awful long time. It's a part of the way urban space exists. And there's a really close connection between physical venues in buildings and outside performance, in that there's they're both part of a scene in that sort of sense. And live performance, particularly when it's part of a big event which takes place outside in the city, really contributes to the image and identity of cities. And cities now are starting to recognize this and acquire it as part of how they project themselves in PR terms throughout the world. It's not just about performances which are actually negotiated or permitted, but also those which are about music which comes through protest or busking. So there's lots of different sorts of live music in urban space, and lots of different scales, from big concerts with thousands of people down to just an individual singing or performing to a very small number of people. The thing about particularly large performances, but small ones too, is it's a kind of a spectacle, and it creates very unique memories for people in those urban environments. They see them in a different way from the way that they saw them before. So instead of somewhere where you just go and do your shopping or something like that, suddenly you start to see, oh, that was the place where I saw that amazing singer, or that's where this place where I saw that my favorite band on that playing on that stage. So it does transform the way people relate to the city and the spaces. But there are also lots of problems associated with it. And these problems have become greater in some senses in recent times, and that we have now a lot of public urban space, which is actually not really public at all, but it's privately owned space. And the people who own that space control what happens on that space. And so they may like one particular part of music, or they may not like another. And so they're controlling the way that space is used. And it's not such a free-for-all as it might have been in the past. However, there are some upsides as well, and that is that because of this recognition that live performance in public space is quite special, designers of urban public space are now starting to take it into account and make specific spaces for live performance, putting in features in that space which make it safer or easier for performance to take place. And, you know, I used examples in the chapter. Liverpool's a good example because we spent, there was a £2 million project on the urban waterfront, and a big part of that was to create several new performance spaces for large events with thousands of audiences of thousands, but also audiences, much smaller audience as well, on an ad hoc basis. And I think that this idea of live performance in public space is something that may be very valuable in the near future with COVID-19, because obviously it's safe, perhaps, to be outside and have these sorts of events compared to inside, at least in the near future.
Okay, thank you very much. And actually, next speaker will be Les, yes, because he also wrote about space of performance.
And I guess my chapter connects very much with a phenomenon that Arno referred to in the opening chapter, and that's the fact that small venues are under threat. Grassroots live music venues have been under threat over a period of years. And I suppose if we consider those venues to be the research and development department of the music industry, the place where new artists are able to cut their teeth and develop new material, the falling away of those venues, for the reasons that Arno quoted before, is a problem. And I was considering ways in which that problem could be solved. And one of them that I looked at as a case study was a very small venue in Yorkshire called The Puzzle. And The Puzzle, over a period of years, had become a very important venue, despite its tiny size. And it hosted some really significant rock music, folk and jazz original artists, very often at the beginnings of their career. Now, like many small venues, it struggled and it closed some years ago. But the love that musicians and music fans had for the venue led to a rescue attempt. And that rescue attempt has been successful. And the venue has reopened as a not-for-profit community asset, a cooperative owned by the music fans and the musicians themselves. The way in which it was done, although almost unique in terms of the music industry, a venue being bought and cooperatively run after it has closed down, I've argued that it actually falls into a much more historically rooted form of music promotion, a community-based one. And it is in Yorkshire, and Yorkshire is a place that has been known for the brass band movement, for folk clubs, for community choirs. And so this tradition of community-owned and community-run not-for-profit music making goes back for 150 years or more. And I guess as we look for solutions to the problem of small venues closing, looking at solutions that are not a commercial capitalist solution, but are a community solution, may be one way forward. And that's kind of sums up very quickly, as I know we're short of time, what my chapter is about.
Okay, thank you very much, Les. And the following chapter actually was written by myself, so I tried to be as brief as possible, being aware that we might run out of time. So I wrote a chapter about coastal festivals in Poland, which took issue with the situation in Poland, specifically as a post-communist country, which enjoyed a different type of festivals in the past, festivals which were founded by the state and then moved to commercial festivals, and on some occasions adopted a neoliberal model of music with great zeal, and tried to show the advantages and disadvantages of this model, in particular the use of unpaid labor. But also I looked at the specificity of the coastal region, where being at the festival was always something taken for granted, and the advantage of this specific location for festivals. Moving to COVID, actually, I wanted to say that Poland wasn't particularly strongly hit by COVID. And as a result of that, many of the festivals actually will take place. So, and most likely without social distancing, as far as I'm aware. Whether it will happen or not, we will see soon, because the festival season is about to start in July. And the last part of our book was devoted to evaluation of live music. So it took issue with the question of its value for the viewers, for the attenders, particularly authenticity and the ways in which this sort of sense of authenticity is created. And the first author was Beate Peter, who was discussing new raves. Do we have Beate here?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Right, okay.
So can you introduce yourself and describe your chapter briefly?
Yeah, my name is Beate Peter. I'm at Manchester Metropolitan University, and I've been researching electronic dance music for the past 15 years. And what interested me in this particular case study is the use of the term rave, and how particular connotations were used that are very popular and kind of in a popular memory, and others were ignored. So my case study was a Skepta gig that took part as part of the Manchester International Festival that I went to, and I was quite surprised when we got the first communication, which was a text message and addressed us as ravers, and we were to meet at a kind of secret location, and we shouldn't come kind of and attract attention. So it was all handled very secretively, and so I was intrigued at how Skepta, who is not necessarily known to stage raves, is using this concept of a rave to create a particular atmosphere inside the venue. And what I paid most attention to is the role of technology in this. So a very common criticism of clubbers these days, or aging ravers who I've worked with in the past, is that the selfie culture has kind of destroyed what's going on the dance floor. And at this particular gig, mobile phones were locked away, and participants were informed about this beforehand. And I was looking at this juxtaposition of, on the one hand, the removal of technology from individual participants, but on the other hand, the kind of overt use of technology as soon as you enter the venue. sort of scanning of the bodies, kind of live installations on the walls, the lighting, the staging, how dance floors were kind of demarcated, and so on. And it's kind of discussing the possibilities that technology offers us in creating a particular sense or atmosphere that many aging ravers kind of refer to as having been lost. And I'm wondering in this chapter to what extent technology can actually help us to recreate that particular atmosphere.
Okay, thank you very much. And then we have Michael Tsangaris, who focused on a specific event and collected testimonies of the participants in order to find out whether this event was seen as authentic. So again, Michael, can you introduce yourself and elaborate on your points, please?
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I would like to congratulate Ewa, Tony, and Les, and the editors, and everyone that participated in this event and in the edition. Secondly, I would like to say that I'm very happy to participate in an event that Peter Hook participates too, because he was my favorite musician since I was very young. So I'm really happy about this. So my name is Michael Tsangaris. I come from the University of Piraeus in Greece. I come from the mass media and communication sector. I'm not into musicology or music studies. And the chapter that I wrote is the chapter 12. And this chapter examines how technology of the spectacle affects the audience sense of definition and of live music and liveness. It is based on the focus group interviews that were taken during the concert of Arctic Monkeys in Greece at the Rock Wave Festival in 2018. What I did is I separated three categories, the groups that I interviewed. One category included the people that were raised and born with the new technologies. They have never been to a concert that used analog technology. Another group included people that have experienced both technologies. And the older category was the group that had grown up all his youth and the adolescence with the analog technology, to see the differences about the opinions of all these people concerning the new technologies. The main conclusions of the research was that the audience reflected the traditional discourse, the classical discourse about liveness, live music, and authenticity in relation to technology of Fallon and Auslander, etc. In some and why is this? Because in some degree, all the people considered that authenticity is connected with the sense of coexistence in the same place at the same time in a unique event. So they believe that authenticity in live music means they were close to the opinion of Phelan concerning classic liveness. But at the same time, the same people did not reject all the other definitions about live music, like that included immediacy, community, interactivity, virtuality, which were more close to the new generation. All these concepts were ideas referred to authenticity, how the younger generation of the audience felt about it. So historic, as we see, the subject is, the conclusion is that liveness and live music was perceived by the people in a relative concept. In the same way, I could say that people have more or less the same definition about live music and felt the same about liveness, but they have differences in intensity about its meaning of immediacy, of community, virtuality. Other people were more intense in thinking that live music is something that has to do with co-presence. Other people were more close to immediacy or virtuality or networking. Anyway, this thing, I conclude that this situation is the cause of this situation is actually it's due to the control that the music industry has in this definition in selling products of live music, as the music industry and the communication industry, in media industry in a wider sense, change meanings with the developments, the evolution of according to the evolution of technology, what live music means in order to sell more products. So the meaning of live music changes according to the changes that the media industries or the music industries do in relation to the development of the technology.
Okay, thank you.
Thing that,
I think perhaps we ran out of time, so maybe we'll return.
Okay, and that was yes, the main thing. And another thing was that the people gave many aspects about many thoughts about the future of live music, like futuristic, I would say. Like the concept in the future would be like connected to robotics, holograms, etc., etc. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we now move to our last chapter and our last author, Valerie Soe, who wrote a chapter about K-pop in relation to, again, authenticity. Valerie, please introduce yourself.
Sure. I'm Valerie Soe. I teach at San Francisco State University, and I think I'm the only person not on UK time right now, so it's a bit early for me, but thank you so much for inviting me, and I'm very excited to see the book. I can't wait to read the rest of the chapters. So my chapter was about live music, and specifically in relation to CN Blue, who is a band. Actually, most people think of K-pop groups as being dance groups, but this is a band, people who play musical instruments. And they have established themselves as one of the most popular live performance groups throughout Asia, and primarily through using, their live music. And so they are really using their live performances to move beyond just being regarded as K-pop idol groups, like a dance group. So they really want to establish themselves as legitimate musicians and artists. And the way they do that is through their live performance. They've really honed their live performances, and they're actually the primary way that they're known now. They do release studio music, but they mostly tour, like a lot of other bands throughout the world. And that's also, of course, the way they make most of their money, because touring pays much more than royalties at this point. especially in the days nowadays we have streaming and so forth. The other thing that's interesting that they've done with their live performances is that they've used they have become representatives of Hallyu, which is the Korean wave. And it's a way that the South Korean government has extended their cultural reach beyond Korea as a form of soft power. So that's discussed a bit as well as in the chapter, is how CNBLUE has become cultural ambassadors throughout Asia and around the world. And of course, nowadays we see that's happening with BTS, right? BTS is this giant group. But CNBLUE is different from BTS, again, because they do play live music. They play instruments, they're a band, and they've really used their live performances in that way to move beyond their K-pop roots and really try to be regarded on the world stage as a band, as artists.
Okay, thank you very much.
Sure.
We wanted to use also the time to have a bit of discussion about the future of popular music in the context of what was written and also what wasn't written in the book. I wonder if I can pass now to Les. Perhaps Les, would you like to?
Yes, yes, indeed. I mean, I think we're going to try something that I think is very ambitious considering the technology that we're using. I'd like us to sponsor an unstructured conversation where we can have a dialogue about the ideas we've each raised in our chapters. I don't know whether this is going to work. We'll do our best, but we're breaking new ground here.
Ambitious is our middle name. Yes, indeed. Are our middle names.
So I'm just going to ask if do we want to take a very short comfort break before we start?
Maybe just carry on, I think.
Just carry on. Okay. Well, as it's an unstructured conversation, feel free to drift off and make yourself a cup of coffee or a gin and tonic, depending on what time of the day you're in your various parts of the world.
It's 8 a.m. a gin and tonic. That is right.
And because I see this as the post-conference bar. This is the point where all of the really interesting conversations start to take place at the conference when the formal discussions are over. So yeah, I guess we're going to be talking about each other's chapters, but also inevitably, we've started to have conversations about COVID and about the impact. And I suppose that falls into two areas. I suppose it's about the new forms of performance that are emerging or could emerge using technology at the moment, using the very kind of technology we're using to have this conversation. But also, I think looking forward to a post-COVID transition, because I think what's clear is we're not going to suddenly flip a switch and be back to 1999. We're going to be in a post-COVID situation, which will be transitional, where, as we discovered in the panel discussion that Tony chaired, there are inherent difficulties to returning to touring and large-scale performances. So at this point, I'm just going to throw the conversation open and see who would like to start off and talk about these things. Please feel free to unmute yourself.
I'll chip in as everyone's being quiet. The thing I would say, which interested me from that conversation, I thought it was a great panel debate, by the way.
Yeah.
They're very interesting, and all the panelists had something useful to say, was that there was two things. Well, one was there was a hesitation at taking up possible new ways of performing. The people who are professional musicians there were nervous about what it would mean. Yeah. And also the other thing was that there's also hesitation from promoters in sort of recognizing the value of the live streaming performances, which we've been having, which have been pretty great. The ones I've seen have actually made me go and buy tickets for a tour which is happening next year of that band, because I'd seen them on this live performance on. So that one I couldn't understand. But the idea of different sorts of performances live seemed quite an odd one to me. But I obviously believe it. And one of the ones which are particularly, I'm surprised hasn't started yet, is the idea that you can do large performances but outside, and that will come in sooner than performances in a traditional venue.
Robert, you see architectural solutions to the kind of post-COVID live situation?
Well, the architects are talking a lot about the post-COVID place for buildings and how we design buildings and things in the future. And one of the big things which is coming forward is the idea of flexibility and adaptability and being able to just modify and change environments very, very easily and quickly, which has been in the air for quite some time, but it's something that's happening. And I think that that's the same situation we're talking about outside as well. The idea of, that things aren't going to stay the same for the next year or two. So let's just do what we did when responded really effectively to building a new hospital inside a big, a big shed, is to just, okay, we'll just grasp the metal and go for something which is quite different and quite radical, flexible and temporary. And I have a view about why this is happening, why it's not being adapted. And there's that is because there's uncertainty about when we're going to come out of it and what the government are going to do next, because it's not been that clear about where they're going next. If we had some sort of prediction of what the situation was going to be like in the future, then we could maybe invest in that way, or the industry could invest in that way a lot more readily. And I guess that's a difficult thing to do. I understand that. But that would be, it's not going to, as you just said yourself, it's not going to be the same for the next year at least, and maybe longer. So rather than stopping everything, let's just invest and move forward.
Robert, can I ask you? Obviously, your background is in architecture, and I've actually been involved in quite a lot of music space design from a commercial point of view, mostly venues. But there is a sense that, could you design the ultimate post-COVID gig space? And what would that look like? I suppose one of the things, when you were looking at Live Nation and they were talking about or trialing bringing cars, and the adaptation to enable, the delivery of an experience at a, I suppose that's in some way comparable to what we might have experienced at a live concert. So they have to increase the height of the staging. They have to, reimagine it really. But, is that something, do you think if the rehabilitation period is going to be very long, is the scope, could it be done? Could we create, the ultimate sort of COVID type spaces that are going to address the concerns of, catching the thing?
Well, this is what I would say in answer is that I would say, yes, it can be done, because if you look at what's already happened with things like shops and hospitals and things like that, people thought about it and created solutions to make sure that they can be opened, and that within a few days, you could go to a supermarket, something like that, and shop again. Now, I know that's a different situation, because the whole point about live music performance is a gathering of people together to experience something together, because that's what it's all about. It's the wonderful thing about it. But I think it could be done. It would be a different experience from the experience that we've been used to, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it would be a wholly unworthy experience. It could be something which could still be valuable. And my mind goes back to every single year I go to Sound City in Liverpool, and when we've had and to the Liverpool International Music Festival, and you go to a concert there in one of the field bowls, if you like, and people naturally spread themselves around in order to sort of have their own little personal space. They can have a drink and they can talk amongst themselves or just enjoy the music. And there will be a crowd at the stage, but there will be that when you've got the space, that spreading around doesn't necessarily mean that the experience is awful. And I think that's, it needs creative thought, and it needs unfortunately it needs investment as well. And I think that the hesitancy and the worry about, well, is it worthwhile doing it, and will the rules be such that we can't make it work, is stopping people investing in that at the moment. Whether or not we get to a stage when they will investment, I don't.
What do we think?
Very flexible, that can be remodeled in accordance with the changing attitudes towards reconvening with large numbers of people again. Sorry.
I was just saying one more thing. I've been amazed by how many people will stand in a specific place because there's a marker there, because that's where you have to stand in order to do social distancing. And if you just fill a field with a whole load of circles, a meter or a meter and a half apart, and say, well, your circle's number A31, how is that different from going to a concert hall and saying, well, I'm going to sit in seat A31?
Can I just throw in another little hand grenade there? Sorry to interrupt, Les.
I think it was Valerie, who wanted to chip in.
Sorry.
Oh, actually, I was going to talk about something slightly different as far as live streaming is concerned. So maybe after this concludes, I can.
I think it probably would be worth moving on to talk about some of the technological and digital solutions.
I was actually going to suggest, Les, I was going to talk, just the hand grenade I was going to roll in was technological. And it was, this idea of, I'm doing some work on virtual reality with regards to, can we recreate some of our traditional experiences with VR? But of course, there is actually no, you can
just to widen out the conversation a little bit. There are a number of technological solutions that have been mooted that include virtual reality, digital streaming, holograms, etc. And I'd just like to throw it out to a wider group of people, because I know there's been considerable discussion about this within your chapters and since, to look at to what extent do these solutions satisfy the kind of need for live performance that Michael talked about in his chapter, that sense of connection, that sense of being in a space at a time, and that sense of immediacy.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw that out.
Yeah, actually, that's what I was actually thinking of, because one of the things that a lot of people have mentioned, I think Stephen even mentioned the vibrations of the kilohertz on skin, which is amazing to think about, is how will the performers be able to replicate the relationship with the audience that they have in a live performance if they're digitally streaming? Because nowadays, of course, we have the problem with the lag, right? The lag in broadcast when you're streaming and so forth. So if an artist is used to immediately responding to the audience and communicating with them in microseconds, how can that be replicated in a live stream where there's a delay? I think in my chapter, I talk a little bit about something that's called the vibe, right? EDM critics have written about this, as well as live performance critics. And they've talked about how the vibe is created by this constant interplay between the audience and the performer that is ongoing, and it just amplifies. It vibrates back and forth. So how can that be done when there is a digital delay, even if it's just a few seconds? How can you maintain that? So that's one of the things I think that'll be a challenge for performers, and that technicians will have to address.
I mean, Duncan addressed this a little in his chapter.
Arno, I think, wants to mention something.
Yeah, I think to an extent it also leads to new forms of interaction. So for some artists, they use the chat to have a conversation with their fans in between songs. So obviously this only works with small groups and for artists who do small gigs. But yeah, still I think that there can be these interesting forms of creating fan communities on a grassroots level through digital technologies.
We're going to have to learn to play the new instruments that we're dealing with now, including the technology.
Yeah, I think the social media connectivity it creates that personal connection, but I guess the intensity of the live experience is something that
could be diluted.
And again, I'd like to bring in some of the people who've talked about technology to give their view about how that intensity of live experience, to what extent it can be replicated using digital technology.
I guess I could sort of chip in and say a couple of things, because sort of one of the things that I focused on quite a lot is how actually there's, even with the kind of technology that we've got now and, fiber optic broadband and all that kind of stuff, we still have to deal with quite a lot of lag, whether it's like live streaming or, jamming online, stuff like that. And a large part of, the solutions to that is kind of embracing it to an extent. And a couple of examples which I've seen recently, which you may or may not be aware of, which I thought have been, really interesting responses to artists who still need to put on shows, but, how are they going to do it? Is like sort of performances online within sort of video games. So you may have been aware that like there have been like Fortnite performances. If you're not aware, Fortnite is just a sort of very popular video game where you sort of run around a giant landscape. And from some of the footage, I kind of thought like these people are sort of playing as their avatars or whatever, and there is like that kind of extra step of being kind of able to move around a space. And famously Deadmau5 was projected on like a big screen and everything. And, it might potentially have links with the sort of VR, AR stuff that Tony was talking about. And so there is interesting stuff being done in that area as well.
Can I just add to the subject? I think what was mentioned about the live streaming is really important. In my opinion, I think that there's a way forward through that, but I think the barrier that comes in, which we're seeing now even within this discussion, is the concentration in the wrong area. We immediately go to the visual. We immediately want to interact visually. We're using platforms such as Zoom, such as Discord, which have got these wonderful video views and are streaming in mono, which frankly is I find that pretty laughable, really, in the age that we're in. I think that the problem is that somebody does need to invest within things, and some people do need to push things forward, because at the moment, the only thing that I'm really seeing from the sort of pop artists that I would be working with is people using live streaming for some sort of self-gratification, and not really supporting any of the industry. The industry's being left behind because it's not being looked after, basically. That isn't the same for everyone. There's a lot of bands, Live Nation as well, for example. Live Nation have done some really good charitable things to try and support the industry, the live industry on the whole. And some artists as well have done merchandise deals where they've supported the crews. But for the most part, this live streaming, I'm sorry, but it's not going to go anywhere, because live streaming over Instagram is not the future of live music.
I guess there's a parallel. I was looking at some footage of the Beatles playing American football stadiums in the early 1960s, and the technology, the performance technology, was laughable by modern terms. There were vocals going out on a tannoy system. There were amplifiers that weren't mic'd up, and it looked like an extremely amateurish setup compared with even the most basic kind of local gig these days. So is it that the technology has not yet caught up with the new reality? Are we going to see an explosion, a development of new technology that will facilitate this kind of distanced performance?
I think as soon as an artist starts to pay to do it properly, it will have a knock-on effect. In my opinion, when somebody actually gets crews involved, which is difficult at the moment, I understand that. But when somebody actually puts the effort in to do more than broadcast from a bedroom, that is when we'll start to see movement. Because otherwise, why would you invest in it? It's like there's no point, because people can just do this. So why would we invest any further?
That is happening more though, isn't it? With like Laura Marling doing her performance in, where is it, in London? And as I mentioned it in the chat in the panel before, that was geo-locked just to the UK. So and
yes, this is exactly what's needed, isn't it? Like
yeah,
more things like that.
And that had a full proper, as you're saying, audio team behind it rather than just being a DIY in the house.
Yeah.
However, you know, that's a lot of what my chapter is about, is this kind of DIY stuff. And I totally appreciate a lot. I did talk about the audio problems as well with that. But I think depending on where people are in their career, there can be an interesting starting point. And what I was trying to say is quite oftentimes people look to kind of do small gigs, but they could look online to start building an audience internationally without having to leave the house, basically. And we are seeing more of that. And yeah, like people are saying, the more the technology gets better, maybe, you know, I actually, as a lecturer, one of the modules I teach, music performance, I had to move the whole assessment online, which previously it was, you know, I was assessing a gig. And then, so I had to rewrite and reimagine how that looked. And what one of the big things I was getting to do is, you know, getting people to think about this little screen as the stage, and thinking about their performance environment, thinking about the sound, thinking about how they're addressing the audience. So it's almost, as some people were referencing, a new type of way of engaging audiences, and some people are good at doing the almost TV presenter element and some people aren't. So I mean, yeah, it's interesting, isn't it?
Coming to throwing out a question about live performance, what we're doing now, our conversation, is being streamed on YouTube and it will be recorded. If somebody comes and listens to this recording, watches this recording 2 days from now, are they getting a different experience because it's not live?
I will say, I guess so. I think it's different experience when you experience it in the current time, and when you experience it with a delay. It's something to do with sort of memory and history, and you know, immediate experience. I think it will be a different experience,
because we have 50 years, 60 years of YouTube videos. If we want to go back in time, we can listen to Elvis Presley, or we can listen to Jimi Hendrix. Does it make a difference?
Well, what can I suggest this?
And in fact, those recordings may be of a far higher quality than a streamed live performance. Now, why do we want to watch a streamed live performance when we could watch a recorded performance of extremely high production values?
Can I just respond?
Sorry.
Well,
Oh yeah.
Sorry, I was going to say, one of the things we can do if you're watching it live is you can actually leave questions. And I'm going to suggest that we actually may look at YouTube live now, because actually people have been texting me saying there's questions on there. And we can, you know, so we can actually respond to those now, where we couldn't if we were, you know, if we're reviewing this, historically.
A very good case in point. Tony, do you want to relay the questions to?
I can do. Well, there's some points as well. I did try and get to them a little bit in the other panel. Let me just try and pull some. as far as live stream gigs go, do we feel audience retention and engagement will change as other social aspects are introduced back into society? Also, what do we think these changes may be?
Would anyone like to pick that up? Is live streaming merely an emergency measure that will fade away once actual live performances are possible again?
I can
Mark,
say something about that.
You're somebody who was doing this before COVID. You clearly feel as though that live streaming has a future as a live performance strategy.
Yeah, again, as I was saying just now, I mean, particularly at an emerging level, perhaps, and I'm just reading the YouTube comments now, and it's quite interesting seeing what people are saying in terms of devaluation of performances and things like that, because I think people are just merely turning the camera on themselves and giving it a go, rather than necessarily thinking about the audience and the viewer at the other end of that live stream. No, I mean, particularly, I'm not sure who's talking.
Maybe if anyone is looking at the YouTube, perhaps turn the sound down on the YouTube just to make sure that we don't get any echoes. Does anyone take a different? From my point of view, and this is my personal view. For me, the live experience, the intensity of being in a room with a performer performing in the moment, and that music happening once and once only, never to be repeated as a unique experience. To me, that is something so different to the experience of looking at a screen, however high quality, that I see no substitute for it that doesn't have a sense of the ersatz about it.
Can I add a little something?
I would say that it's perhaps, it's unique, but this experience is also unique for us. I think that this has some sort of quality which I never experienced before, and I feel very nervous. I know that I'm making mistakes and so on, but I also find it interesting and challenging, and I wouldn't say, I don't want to do it again, and it's only as an emergency measure. I think, we might do it more of this type of events, even if, pandemic passes. So I wouldn't say it's I agree with you that, being in the same room as a performer is different, but also I would say this is also unique and valuable. But the question which,
this is the fact that this is unique, of course, doesn't make it a live experience to me. And if I can add something to what Les was saying and about the question that was asked, I think that the mistake that a lot of people make nowadays is that they think live or live music is about, it's just a temporal thing. So if you're there at the same moment as when it happens, it's a live experience. I don't think that that's what live music is about. And I don't even think that live music is about a time-space thing. But I think the power of live and live music is in the combination of the presence of yourself, the crowd, the audience, and the artist. So I think, of course, all the things that are happening right now with streaming music, with live music in Fortnite, with holograms or artificial intelligence or anything what's happening, it's all very interesting, and I think it will all become more important and interesting in our lives, but it's not a substitute of live music, and it will never be. So I think we really have to separate these developments from each other.
Yeah, I think as long as we don't try to replicate the live performance experience exactly, it's not, then we'll obviously be disappointed. But one thing someone else mentioned earlier is the fact that the chat becomes very important in these kind of streamed events. And the fans become very important because they create that sense of community by using the chat and talking with each other. So CN Blue is actually very famous for doing live performances that are recorded, and then they've done one where they while they were in the army in the past couple of years, in Japan, their company rented out movie theaters and played recordings of their live performances, and fans would go to the movie theaters and watch these live performances on the screen and then interact as if it was a live performance. So again, creating that community through the use of the fan interaction is really an interesting thing that's happening now. And I think that like the chat thing is really amazing. I feel like people are going to be talking about how chat has like affected the way people you know, absorb live performances and any kind of performances like Zooms. So yeah.
I do think so. Sorry, that the main difference here is I don't think anybody argues that any of those new developments are disappearing, but I think what has to be kept in mind is that when we look, for example, at streaming, it's predominantly a visual and auditory impact, and the body and the kind of embodied experience disappears. So I've done, I started research doing on these kind of streams, on these kind of living room parties, on these, you know, kind of Saturday streams. And it's not very many people who dance, who actually get up and dance. And if they do so, it's in a very kind of close environment, and they're actually intoxicated to some degree. And I think, you know, streaming definitely, you know, is a new trend, and I don't think it will disappear either. But to immerse yourself in a situation with your body is something else altogether. Now, the live gig isn't the only way to do it, but it's definitely one of those ways in which you are physically present, and also the audience is physically present. So it's important to see the person next to you or before you or behind you. And I can't remember in the previous discussion, somebody mentioned it, you know, the live event lives by you standing close to somebody else. So the whole social distancing measures now that are coming in for live gigs, they will have a huge impact on the atmosphere, and atmosphere is what I'm all about. You know, how do you then relate to the person if the person is suddenly 2 meters away, rather than you standing shoulder to shoulder and exchanging glances and smiles or whatever else, and cheering and having a beer together. So, you know, it'll definitely change, but I'm convinced that live events in which you are physically present are coming back, and the future is not necessarily a live stream where you watch DJs on their turntables and a few kiddies walk dancing in the background. It is something about the embodied experience.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. And it's not just the actual event itself. It's also this thing that happens. It's the getting ready, it's to go, it's the buying the ticket, it's the going there, it's making the journey with friends, arriving, queuing up outside. When you get inside, if you read any fan forums about venues, they talk about the bad things about the venue as lovingly as they talk about the good things about the venue. So it's really smelly, you know. There's one famous one which I used a few times about the Point in Dublin, and the guy said, you know, the Point is an absolute pit, but it's our pit. You know, is this sort of, you know, they loved it because of what it was like, and any good venue has that. So you're absolutely right. It will come back. And I'm sure we've all got that faith that will happen.
Mark, very patiently there to comment. Mark.
Yeah, thank you. Mark. I don't think anyone, including myself in the chapter, is arguing against real gigs in physical spaces being incredible, the best by a mile. However, I think that what I was talking about is a new type of performance that's emerging, and based on what other people have just said here, sorry, I'm not familiar with all of your names, Valerie, who was talking about the comments and things like that, and what I wrote about in my chapter is a lot of people are doing a new type of performance where they're actually using those comments to adapt the performance as in real time as it goes, and that's really interesting. People are even writing songs as a performance and making beats and asking for feedback on the beats and the songs and the performance in the comments. And I think that's a whole new type of live performance, which is totally separate from a band playing their hearts out, etc., on stage, which we all know and love, including myself, who plays live in a band like that. I'm more referring to a whole new type of, yeah.
I mean, it creates a stream for innovation, doesn't it? You know, the whole situation enables us to review how current available technologies are used, and to respond with something that suddenly makes sense now, which may not have made sense, 4 or 5 months ago, because the external environment, the technological environment, the cultural environment have changed. So you see, quite significant shifts in this unprecedented situation. Certainly I think in all of our lives, this is unprecedented. So we're seeing new things evolving in different ways.
But to be honest, I do think that this kind of performance has happened before. I do think a skilled DJ is able to read their audience, and they take different cues. It's not the written word.
Indeed.
But they can read from the dance floor what the audience want, and they will, unless they want to educate, they will pick up on these cues and adjust the performance accordingly. And there is, I'm not saying the same level of interaction, but there's also a level of interaction. What we're seeing here is just different senses being engaged to also explore different ways of interacting with an audience. But I don't think it's now the case that suddenly the audience is becoming more important. I'm convinced that the live gig is only becomes a good gig if the audience and the band or the DJ interact very closely.
Can I just maybe introduce a different aspect of this discussion, namely the economic aspect of these new technologies? I think Mark in his chapter somehow mentioned live streaming as a kind of sort of leveler, as something which gives less known musicians or musicians who are based on the margin geographically, for example, an ability to achieve certain position which otherwise would be very difficult to achieve. And I just wonder if this is really the case, and also the changes which COVID might bring would help these musicians, or rather make music, popular music, more kind of like a pyramid, with those at the top taking the most of the revenue and those at the bottom really disappearing more and more. Now, if anybody wants to comment on that.
Yeah, I'll jump in. Some of what I just, off the back of that, some of what I discovered as well is that, there's various people with accessibility issues to venues and things that are turning to live streaming as performers or as audience members. And there's some elements of it that those people might not get that same level of interaction with an artist that they would have normally. So yeah, it is interesting. Anyone else want to jump in?
Mark, can I say one of the things I've noticed is Mark has a couple of times in this conversation referenced, he's aware of what's going on the YouTube live stream. Now I'm painfully aware, because I'm thinking people are, leaving us comments and, but Mark, who's quite experienced, or very experienced in doing this online type of activity, interacting with audiences as a musician, has a greater capacity than I do to address these issues. He's sort of moving in and out of this, so he's kind of practiced. I'm keen to acknowledge the people who are leaving comments. I know it's a sort of slight deviance. Could we run through some of them, please?
Tony, I'm aware that Rick wanted to just make a comment before. Can we just hear from him?
Of course.
Yeah, and the point that I want to make is also, can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
Yeah, I have a crying daughter in the background, so I hope it's not interfering too much. But I would like also to connect to a point that has been made in the comments about the position of early career musicians in all of this, because I do think it's difficult for beginning bands or bands who don't have a large following to monetize these online opportunities, right? I don't see, well, in the near future, live streaming turn into a viable source of income for these groups of musicians. There are, of course, some possibilities that these offer. I think that the interaction that you can have in chats, for example, with fans might create new bonds with audience members that can turn into an increased number of ticket sales. But this all depends on being able to go out there, go to venues and play gigs again, and then earn money there by ticket sales and by merchandise, right? So it has opportunities also to build audiences abroad and to build new connections with audience members, but really earn money of this, I think for a large group of musicians right now is a real challenge. So, you know, I think that a lot of musicians right now are waiting until all of this blows over and can go back to playing live music again.
Shall I run through? That was great, Rick. Thank you very much for those comments. Shall I run through some of these comments then, and you know, see if we can pull out some questions? I'm not that experienced at doing this, you know, in real time, but I'll do my best. So please bear with me. Okay, Michael, do you draw on Paul Sandon's multivalent theory of musical liveness?
Yeah, I've seen this, but no, I'm not. I have no. It's not. I've seen this comment. But...
Okay, so no. So Ian O'Connor, no. As far as live stream gigs go, do we feel audience retention and engagement will change as other social aspects are introduced back into society? Have we done that one?
We've done that one too.
Okay, apologies. Okay, Adam North, how will smaller bands at the start of their career be able to utilize streaming services for revenue, in your opinions? Well, Rick's kind of talked about that a bit, hasn't he? Basically saying it's difficult. But I mean, my thoughts were, well, you know, if you can come up with, if you figure out that, wouldn't it be good if this existed or if we did it in this way, you know, you can gain advantage and come up with something, even if you are early on in your career. You know, there's that idea of building your digital footprint, you know, and, you know, digital models versus, you know, live, you know, traditional models of business. You know, so I think, you know, those are areas certainly that can be explored. I don't know if anyone else would like to add to that.
It just strikes me that this is a double whammy. We've got a complete shutdown of live music across many countries just at the moment when recorded music has ceased to be a viable revenue earner for many artists. This is, you know, for many musicians, this is economically, financially disastrous, and I don't think we can minimize that at all.
Okay, so moving on.
Can I just add to Les just very quickly? I just think that we need to recognize that the music industry is not just musicians. That is the overriding thing that I think has come from this. There's 90% of the people making money as a career are not musicians.
That's a very good point, Stephen. And we've got to think about the ancillary industries as well.
Yeah.
It's also, you know, the entertainment and hospitality industry, which is very much, which has been very much supported by live music in the past, and of course the technical and logistical side of the music industry, which you know, it for the industry, this is disastrous, and we've got to have a recovery plan. You know, there needs to be a recovery plan when this, to get us out of this mess. I hate to sound a pessimistic note, but I think that's where we're at.
I would agree.
There's another thing to ask about. Also, the idea that, yeah, we have a recovery plan, but then for the future, there's a plan B. Because this has really shown up a lot of failings across society, really, in economic system, in every area of society. Nobody was planning for this. And it would be interesting to think if this does spur on a plan B for the industry.
For society in general, perhaps.
Well, our first collaborative book that Les and I did was called Popular Music in the Post-Digital Age, and the subtitle was politics, economy, culture, and technology. And there's the premise that, you know, through analysing all of those situations, you can, taking them into account, you can strategize resilient approaches to music. But of course, one of the main points there is that all of those things are macro environmental factors that we have relatively little influence on. And COVID has dramatically impacted, the trump card that has, dramatically impacted on all of those factors. But I'll be honest, I am optimistic because I can see new things unfolding, and work that I'm doing is about coming up with relevant responses that, are going to, one of the things we witnessed was a lot of things being done free when COVID bit. And but now there's a sense, I think you can see a clear thought as to how things can be monetized, digital and live don't have to be two separate things. There's the two things are in dialogue with each other, and it's the exploration of experiences of different types, where solutions can emerge from. But just kind of going back to some of the comments, if I may, we're seeing a trend. So this is the Gallery Creative Arts Burnley. Although streaming gigs and art is great and makes a tool for getting stuff out there, unfortunately, I feel that a lot of artists are creating this devaluation of performances. Would anyone like to pick that up? Performances being devalued?
I'm not certain I actually understand the comment. It devalued in terms of...
well, then maybe they're not as good. Maybe there's so much of them going on that they are just creating, noise. It's hard,
In the next comment, they go on to say, we are seeing a trend already where people are not willing to pay for grassroots-based artists.
Right, I see.
As there's an oversaturation of free streams. So I think it's talking about devaluing it in that sense.
You see, I told you Mark was good at this sort of thing.
I wonder whether anyone feels as though actually the operation of free market economics isn't equal to the task of rescuing.
I think that this may be, if I can chip in, I think this is something which we wrote in the previous book, but also in this book, that it's basically, too many musicians to make money. Similarly, as there are too many, writers, painters, and so on. But somehow the neoliberal economy makes more people believe than in the past that they can be artists. The entrance bar is very low, while the bar for success is very high. So I think the question is when people will recognize it and how they will react to it. Whether it will eventually put off, many musicians, they will decide that they cannot make money from music and they will leave to different jobs, or many will sort of recognize that there will be always, amateurs. So this is a sort of, question, which is interesting. And I think from this perspective, I would say current situation is quite different from what was 20 years ago, when there was this, the promise that the internet will change it. We know now that, internet by itself, or YouTube or whatever, or live streaming wouldn't bring on the whole more money, or wouldn't enable more musicians to become professional than it was the case in the past. Anyway, this is my belief. Maybe you want to challenge it. Or...
We already see a situation. We've seen a situation over the past 10, 15 years where many musicians playing quite large venues or large festivals also have day jobs that they operate throughout the year or have portfolio careers. So many musicians are already kind of, I suppose, needing to diversify their sources of income in order to support their art. And I think that's a decision that a lot of people make.
I think the same.
Can I also say, I know that Rick is also really good because he's made comments, and Mark have both been responding to some of the comments. So well done, guys. Thanks for that. Shall I look at some more of these things? So
I think we also need to finish soon, I believe.
We're running out of time, aren't we? The idea of embodiment that occurs in live performance is super key. How can that be emulated? The DJ and the audience create the vibe together. You know, I think these are all interesting comments. It's also important to consider
those are my comments.
All right, okay, brilliant.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I'm sorry, my screen name is not the same on YouTube.
Right. Okay. Brilliant. Okay.
I guess it's always good to leave a venue before you get thrown out, and we're probably in danger of getting thrown out within the next 10 minutes.
Okay.
From this venue. So I wonder, you know, would people like to perhaps if everyone would like to leave us with their final thoughts on this event, on the future of live music, on the impact
also
of COVID.
the future of live events about music like this one. Maybe this is what you want to say. Do you think this is something which is comparable to live conference, or rather it's an emergency measure, and if you can go to a proper conference, you would prefer to go to the proper one?
And I'll just add that I think it would have been a really difficult task to get all of these eminent people into a room at the same time in person, but we've managed to get you all here. We didn't have to fly Valerie from San Francisco, which is, you know, which helps the university's hard-pressed budget. But it's great that we can see everyone here. And yeah, quite frankly, it might have been difficult for us all to gather and talk if we weren't using this technology. So I suppose life has handed us this lemon, but we're making lemonade with it.
Clouds and silver linings. I can see Eric wanting to make a comment, by the way.
Eric.
Yeah, I think it's a great opportunity to have this kind of book launch, right? It's something that adds to the kind of experience that we have as you know, academics, and if we translate that to the live music industry, I think what we will see is that it will take quite a long time for the live music industry to kind of get back on its feet again, and there are a lot of venues that are going to go bankrupt, and a lot of facilities companies and you know, all of that networked industry. That will be difficult, but at the same point, there will be all these kind of new ideas and new technologies and new possibilities that are emerging, and that allow us to interact with musicians, with each other, with fans. So it kind of adds up to the whole palette that we have available for us, I think.
I agree.
Okay, so should we close it?
Yeah, that will be my final comment.
Okay.
Any other final comments? Oh, I have one. I'd just like to say, you know, whilst people are saying very nice things about, you know, congratulating us, the editors, I'd like to congratulate you all and thank you all for your brilliant contributions to what is actually, you know, an excellent book. So in my humble opinion, well, I would say that, wouldn't I? But, you know, it's really been great, you know, the whole process. And I think this has been, you know, a really nice icing on the cake event where we've been able to get everyone or the majority of contributors into the digital space and hear what everyone's had to say, you know, and I hope we can do it again.
Okay. Thank you. Yes, thank you to everybody also on my behalf. And thank you also, Tony, because you are really the main person behind this event. If not for you, we wouldn't have it today.
You're very kind. You're very kind. It was new for everyone, though, wasn't it? And we were a bit, you know, we weren't sure. You know, Ewa and I were talking about another digital conference. You know, and I think it's useful to find. I think the general vibe is this has been quite successful.
Yeah.
I think it's a very good format with the 3 sections as well. I really enjoyed the first one, and you know, this one's been very good as well. my final comment about this would be that our cities are going to be a lot different after this happens, because a lot of businesses are going to go down, and that includes, unfortunately, a lot of our favorite music venues are going to go as well, and that's really sad. And a little bit of history goes with it when a new music venue goes. But one thing that is true and has been proven time and again throughout history is that music venues are transient situations which reinvent themselves and come back again. So to finish on a feeling of hope, I've written my last book was all about the history of music venues going back for 200 years. And you just see them going and then coming back and then going and then changing and adapting. And that's what's going to happen again. Things are going to change. But as many people here are saying, there will be some great new venues emerging in 2021 or 2022, as well as, unfortunately, some of the really good ones we know now going.
Yeah, there's some challenges to overcome, isn't there? But, it will reinvent, won't it? The whole thing. And hence my optimism.
Any more final thoughts? Would anyone like to make a valedictory comment before we?
I maybe also have actually the last thanks. I would like also to thank to Martin Power and all the technical people who are behind this event. So, and also the University of Central Lancashire, which helped us to do the book and also in all the work towards this event. Thank you.
Thank you, UCLan, yes.
Okay. So we're free to leave now, I believe.
Right.
If no one has any